Alright, I'm gonna go for it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 343 TV. Today we have a bit of a special episode for you. Normally, we have Hardware Basics every Friday with Abe Duque, who, was supposed to be on vacation this weekend.
I'm gonna go for it.
But, he ended up coming back a bit early after asking me to cover, so he is going to be here with us today on the stream. I'll bring him in now, but I was planned to cover the stream for him, which I'm going to continue to go on with. But he is going to be around as my, sidekick for a change. So how we doing, Abe?
Yeah, I'm the wingman today.
It's always good to get a little change here. It looks like we got Nathan Kelly in the chat. Shout out to him.
Right, he says it's the Thomas hour.
Yeah, a few other people are joining in, which is cool to see. Thank you for everybody. Give this a like if you're ready for a good show today. So I thought of a couple different ways to structure this. When Abe asked me to cover the show, and I'm also a really big fan of hardware. Haven't been in kind of the hardware world for as long as Abe has, but I've collected my fair share of gear, and one of the units of gear that I've become, I guess maybe unit isn't the right term, but the style of gear or the device I've really grown to like is just samplers in general, and it's something that Abe hasn't talked all too much about on 343 TV yet in the Hardware Basics show, but I think maybe it's touched upon, sampling devices that could sample, but today I was thinking we could take a dive into, that world with a device.
Hey, Thomas, a couple of things. Sorry to interrupt. I think your camera on the Digitakt is out of focus,
Okay.
and I think it's focusing on the on the plugs, because I could see maybe the red and black plug are maybe more in focus, or something is definitely in focus, but the device itself is not in focus.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I just adjusted that, so let's see if we can get some people to confirm if that's been improved.
Yeah, that looks a lot better now. Yeah, that's awesome.
The lights on there can kind of cause things to go a little crazy sometimes with the autofocus.
And the second thing is, I think there's like an echo in my voice.
Oh, gotcha. Is there a way we could let us know if you can
mute the Skype input? That should do it.
Okay, cool. So I just muted that. Let us know, everybody out there who's watching, how it's looking, how it's sounding. We appreciate that. Keeping on top of everything, and I appreciate you jumping in, Abe. So hopefully we should be in pretty good shape now. You think that we're good to kind of proceed on? Cool. So let us know, everybody out there. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear Abe all right? And I'll kind of get on with it. So the idea is going to be to show you a workflow that I use pretty frequently with samplers like this. It's not going to involve any real computer necessarily. You don't, although I do need the computer to run this stream and to get us up and live on the internet. For a workflow like this, really all you need is some sort of input to sample from, whether it be, I'm going to be using my phone in this case today. You could be using a computer, you could be using a synthesizer, another hardware drum machine. It really could be anything. But the idea is to, take some sounds that we like and get them, recorded into the device here, and kind of mesh it together into a track. So before I get too much into it, I just want to talk a little bit more about the interface of the actual unit. So what we have here is, these 16 buttons, kind of main buttons, or some people maybe would refer to them as pads, but they're really more similar to like a mechanical keyboard. Key is probably the best way to put them. They've got a pretty, the whole entire build quality of the unit is really solid, and it's got almost like a 909 like kind of buttons down here for sequencing things in. And the top row is going to be for your 8 samples. So, you have 8 slots to load in your samples. And then this bottom row is actually used, it's multifunction, but what these bottom row of keys are used for is actually Midi sequencing, which is something we probably won't get into today, but it's a really cool function that a lot of people don't know about. The Digitakt is that it actually has 8 channels of MIDI to sequence, external gear. So like I said, these are our samples. So I loaded in some drums. There is a stock kit that will always load up when you open up a new project. It has kind of an interesting sound. They're unique samples, but they're great for, certain genres of music. I'm not a huge fan of the stock sounds, so what I kind of did is loaded in some sounds that are in the realm of what I was hoping to make today, a little more hip-hop inspired, contemporary hip-hop music. So I got a kick, snare, rim shot, clap. This is actually the stock clap, stock cowbell, which I think I'm going to put my melodic sample over that slot. Just some hi-hats, and then a little, vocal sample. So what I wanted to do is load in the melodic sample and show you the process of actually sampling on the device. So, it's kind of number one function, and it's got a pretty cool interface for that. So what I did here is I went into this direct tab, and it's kind of got the sound wave icon, and this is kind of going to be our sampling menu. So we got the source selected as the external in. So that means that up here at the top, you got 2 1/4" right and left coming in, and we actually have it set to monitor. So if we play something here, it's actually going to be coming through the feed, and it's set to monitor. And if I go to a different page, it will actually continue to monitor, and you can turn monitoring on and off. You can switch to a couple of different sources, so you can resample. You can sample over USB on the latest updates, but it's got everything you really need to kind of get in here and creating some sounds, or really recording some sounds. So to arm, we're gonna hit function and then yes, and that's kind of gonna arm us. And we have it set so that there's a threshold to start, but I keep it pretty low, the threshold, so that it pretty much starts recording as soon as signal starts coming in. So I'm going to arm this, and I'm going to play this sample. Let's just make sure it's the right one. Or is it this one? I'm going to go with this sample, and then we're going to get it recorded in. I'll show you how to kind of splice it up and really get it, ready to play back.
So the sound is really quiet, Thomas.
For the unit,
Oh,
or is it for?
no, I'm sorry. I think we're good. Actually, I wanted to test my sound and see if it was still doubling.
Yeah, let us know out there if you can hear Abe all right on the stream. So basically, we just armed and recorded that in, and now I'm just going to trim this up a little bit. This has kind of got an interesting menu, so you're going to zoom with this B knob and then kind of find your start point here, I'm not sure exactly how well you can see this on the screen, but we can kind of monitor, you know, what we have going on here by hitting function yes and just kind of playing back our recording. So that's pretty much all I'll need. You know, you can chop the end off, but basically when you're in this mode, you got something for me, Abe? Or?
Is that a mono or a stereo sample?
That's a really good question. So I actually wanted to address this. So the Digitakt is, you know, a stereo device, but it samples in mono. So what that means is kind of confusing, is that everything that comes into the machine that's recorded is going to be in mono. And, you know, you can record stereo with two right and left inputs, but it's going to be made mono as soon as it comes in. But if you're applying effects to the samples, like, for example, you can pan and, you know, reverbs and delays, those are actually going to be stereo. So the output from the device itself is going to be stereo, but everything that's being sampled in is automatically turned into mono signal.
Got it.
Yep, so we have pretty much what we want here. So I'm just going to save this in, and we can name it really quick. The naming is kind of interesting. So you hit this function button and you're going to get this keyboard here, and you're going to have to kind of scroll through with the arrows. It's a little bit of a hassle. You know, there's certain things on here that are going to be a lot easier and quicker on a computer, but it goes back to, you know, what we've talked about on previous episodes, that it's more about kind of getting that tactile feel and getting inspired in a different way from what your computer would kind of have you making, and different ideas. So now, yep.
Yeah, as far as I know, also Elektron has a pretty unique workflow that you really need to kind of adhere to and get down with in order, because it does things in a very unique way. A lot of people really, it reminds me of the way the MPCs are the same. You know, the MPC has its own workflow and people get down with that, and they don't change it much through the years. They keep kind of the same basic workflow going. Same thing going on with Elektron, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the huge selling point is the workflow. Like the sequencer, which we'll get into, is really a huge selling point for a lot of customers. And like you said, there's a lot of diehard people who are just kind of super into the workflow and love it. And I've used MPCs and Machine and stuff over the years, and I've really grown to like the Elektron workflow, and it stays the same across a lot of their products. So once you're kind of in, it's kind of hard to get away from it. So definitely a really good point there. So what I'm going to do is, now that we have our sample loaded up and into our fifth kind of sample slot here, I'm going to sequence this on the 1, and we're going to try to get a loop going where it's basically just going to play back the sample in time. So what's important here is that we make sure that we have, you know, our tempo set so that we have a clean loop. So I'm going to go into this metronome icon here, and this is where we can adjust the tempo. So I'm going to bring it up to 150, which was the original length of this sample. And then this is where we get into the sequencer. So I'll start giving a quick breakdown now. It looks like we're a little out of focus. Sorry about that. That kind of keeps happening a little bit. But
yeah, I think if it's easy enough to put it in manual focus, probably be a better way to do it, because a lot of times it happens to me all the time too, when I move my face or take off my glasses, it'll do all sorts of different things with the focusing.
Mm-hmm. So now I think hopefully we should be in focus. Let us know if it drifts out again, but I think we should be stuck in manual. And now you can hear we kind of got our loop going. It's going to be in time. I'm just going to double the length of this. So now we got our clean loop here, and what I did, just to go back and show you how the sequencer works, is basically you hit record and you go into sequencing mode, and then every time you have one of these you know, keys kind of lit up, that's going to be when the sequence starts. So you can see here it's really simple. So our first kind of page here, which is going to represent a bar, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 pages, and this sequence is literally just that sample starting on the first beat or the first bar, and then nothing playing for the rest of the sequence. Starts again at the end of 4 bars. So what I'm going to go on to doing now basically is getting into kind of formulating the track with my regular workflow, and I'll try to explain it the best I can, but basically I'm going to add a snare and then kind of build the drums around that. So typically I'm just using the melodic sound to kind of get us off the ground and going. I might come back and edit that, chop it up, or put some effects on it, but I like to kind of get something looping. It could be rhythmically or melodically, and then kind of start building things around there. So I'm going to go to a snare and start sequencing some other hits in here, just kind of get us in time. Let's see how this is sounding here. So we're going to get these going on the backbeat and see how that sounds, and get a mix going on. I'm going to turn down the melody here. So as I move from page to page kind of and sound to sound, you can see the parameters on the screen changing. That's kind of one of the tough parts about coming into the Elektron workflow from a complete beginner. There's going to be like about multiple levels of menus for each kind of sound you're on, and it takes a little bit getting used to. There's some really good resources online to learn it all, but the best way I found is kind of just get in there and try to make something that sounds good and just make music. And the more you do that, just like using your DAW, it's going to get easier and easier.
How long did it take you to get proficient or enough that you could start making beats with it?
I mean, you'll make stuff, like you'll get in there with the presets on the first few weeks, and you'll make stuff by editing that and kind of learning. But until you feel comfortable enough to just kind of sit down and make music with it, it varies. I think the more you're doing it, the more comfortable you feel. But I've had it for about a year now, a little over a year, and I use it, pretty regularly. So I probably felt more comfortable with it after about 6 or 7 months. But the thing about a piece of hardware like this that's so complex is that you're constantly learning. Whether you're watching a video and you see somebody do something, or you're working on yourself, it's almost like you're always going to learn something new. So kind of just take it with a grain of salt and keep trying to get better and better. But I love that process of kind of getting a new piece of gear and just figuring it out. It's always exciting.
Do they have updates for it? Do they provide updates?
So they do updates. That's another good thing to bring up. So in 2017, this is when the unit first came out. And then more recently, it had one of the major updates, and it added stuff like the ability to sample over USB, a few things here and there, workflow and bug fixes.
What do you mean about the ability to sample over USB?
So it's kind of interesting. So they made it like class compliant audio, I guess. So like if you had your phone or something like with a USB, like say you had a USB-C on your phone, you could just go into it has like a typical USB-B connection, kind of like a regular MIDI controller. You could go directly into there and kind of cut out. I don't know what the exact use for that would be. I mean, you could always sample over audio, but maybe your phone doesn't have a headphone jack and you just feel like you want to go directly in, something like that.
Right.
But
so it acts like a host, like a computer, sort of?
Yep, exactly. And this can actually function as a sound card as well by itself. So it's got, a crazy kind of feature set. But yeah, we'll maybe talk a little bit more about some of the stranger things it does later on. But I'm just going to continue working on this idea a little bit so we can get some structure and talk about some of my other kind of workflow techniques. So I'm just going to turn the snare up a little bit, maybe pitch it down. So the next element I'm going to add is hi-hats. So I'm going to go over to my hi-hat, open up the sequencer, and for this I'm just going to try to get a lot of stuff going on. So what I'm doing now is basically just putting in some eighth notes on the sequencer. I think the more I go, you might kind of start to figure it out a little bit more, hopefully. Definitely ask if you have any questions. But basically, just input the notes. So now that I'm here with the hi-hats, something that is interesting to do, is add in some fills and stuff. And the way that this kind of tactile setup of the Digitakt is designed is like it really inspires you to kind of just get in there and experiment with different things. So I'm kind of just adding in some extra notes where I see fit, and we can just kind of see how it sounds. Another thing you can do is a really interesting feature is called trig conditions, and what that allows you to do is really load, it really customizes what that note on the sequence is going to do. For example, if we just start on our first note here, say I want this to be like a stuttered effect and change it so that it's going to be a repeat, all I'm going to do is hold on that note, hit this up arrow, and we're kind of into the Retrigger menu. And this is where you could kind of choose how many times this is going to get triggered, and how long it's going to stay triggering, a couple of those kind of parameters, which is always fun. So now we kind of have a little bit of a hi-hat pattern, right? I'm going to pitch this a little bit too. One thing I like to do on the hi-hat is use the LFO. So we talked about the LFO in Abe's lessons here on 343 TV previously, but this has a really powerful LFO that you can map to a bunch of different parameters. And for something like the hi-hat, what's fun to do is do something with the pitch, or sometimes maybe the filter frequency. Let's try the frequency if we can get anything interesting going on. So we're just going to adjust that to frequency here, hit yes, and let's see if we can hear a difference. And then when we get to the filter, you can choose between low pass, high pass, a couple of different filter options. Has pretty good layout of how that looks and works visually. It does, like anything else on here, take some getting used to. But now we have our LFO to set, to basically change the filter frequency of the hi-hat over time. And then I'll probably add in some kicks. The mix here will adjust in a bit, so it's going to be kind of loose to start, but we can kind of get into that.
Must be very different to type in things rather than using a mouse.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And one thing I really liked about the sequencer is that I found myself once getting used to it, not overthinking, drum patterns and stuff like that, and questioning it. You kind of just, does it sound good? Does it not sound good? And you just move on. And then in Ableton, you kind of find yourself going back to edit things and move things around a lot, and which is always a function, a useful function to have, of course, but goes back to the idea of just kind of keeping things simple, I guess.
Yeah, limitations are amazing.
Yeah, and as powerful as this device is, it has many limitations, and I think that's what brings the fun to it. So we basically have our little idea here. One thing I wanted to go back and do is try to mess with the sample a bit. So rather than just kind of leaving it traditionally, you have a couple different functions you can do to kind of manipulate it, affect it. One thing I'm going to try is pitching it a bit.
Does the pitch, when you pitch it, does it change the time length?
So this is something that's really I'm glad that you brought up. So it actually is going to change, its timing. So it does not time stretch. That's something about the Digitakt that I wish it did do.
Perhaps in an update down the line.
Yeah, which is something people talk about, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to happen because they have these other products in our lineups that have that kind of feature set, and I think they're kind of walking a fine line between.
You mean like the Octatrack and stuff?
Yeah, like the Octatrack has time stretching, all that built in, has multiple time stretching modes.
Yeah, but that's so like it is so much more hardware there than this thing is. Just to add a bit of time stretching shouldn't be that much.
Yeah, no, and people have asked for stuff like that too, and I think it could come. So what I did here is just I reversed this sample, and then we can see if we can do something with the effects. Like I'm gonna pull in some reverb, some delay, and we'll kind of see how this is sounding. The reverse isn't really, let's see, traditional. Sounding kind of where I'd like it to be, so I'm gonna leave it, traditionally forward, but you kind of get in here and mangle things up, get some overdrive going on. Sometimes it's, nice to just kind of be simple with it. And get the mix kind of going on. Yeah, so we kind of have our basic groove here. I was wondering, not sure what the viewership is looking like, but did we have any questions from any audience members?
No, not too many. I can give you some questions, but actually, we're actually getting up on that half an hour mark. We do have a good amount of people viewing. Everybody's just watching you, I guess, do your thing right now. If you guys have questions, please, we love questions in this show. Questions are awesome because we can get to interact with you guys more. We're about that halfway point where we need to kind of talk about a little bit about what's going on here. What this whole stream is all about.
Definitely.
This is a 343 TV. We stream every day. About 1 o'clock? No, at about. We're pretty punctual. 1 o'clock we're on. If not, there'll be a start screen for maybe a couple of minutes and we'll come in a little late. But about 1 o'clock we're on every day. We have all sorts of different types of shows. We have shows spanning from Ableton-based, Logic-based shows, shows that are based on genres like techno. We have shows that are based on giving you guys feedback. We have shows like today's show. We're talking about hardware. This show is actually going to change a bit. It's going to morph, I would say, a little bit into like including more topics, not only the hardware that we've been, how long have we been doing these hardware? It's the 8th one, right? It's 2 months.
So it's gone by quick, but we're already at episode 8, which is really cool.
Yeah. We started the show with it was called Basics, but it was called Bitwig Basics. We started showing off some Bitwig for a few weeks, so I guess for a month of that. And then we morphed into Hardware Basics. And the next iteration is just going to be basics, and we're going to continue actually doing the hardware, maybe doing the Bitwig. We're going to keep on doing actually everything, basically just covering whatever we can for you guys. So we're going to take questions about anything that really is on your mind, and we're going to hopefully make it a lot better as we keep on going. Today we have Thomas in the driver's seat. Thomas is this is your debut as a Is it your debut as a streamer, a headlining streamer, I guess?
We're getting there, yeah. I've been kind of pushed into the limelight here and there a bit, mainly behind the scenes with 343 TV, but now kind of getting the chance to get out there and show you guys a little bit about, what I've been doing. Using hardware like this, I make some performance videos and stuff in my free time and produce some of my tracks. This way. I do, of course, love to get into Ableton and work in there, but this is just a little bit of a way to kind of give you a peek into some of the stuff I'm making, and I thought it'd be cool to get in here and talk about just samplers as a category. Is one of my favorite, music production devices. So if you have any, general sampler related questions, I'd be happy to get into those.
We do have a question coming in right now from Robert Tarma. In this contemporary hip hop, the drums are mostly synthesized? Question mark. I'm an old person, just as I am, who grew up with the drums sampled off Dusty records.
Got it. So, And it looks like your audio might have been doubling a little bit. Sorry about that. I guess when I switched back to the other scene, it automatically unmuted you. But that's a really great question coming from Robert Homer, so I appreciate him submitting that. It's hard to say if you would consider it synthesized or not. Basically, due to services like Splice, sampling these, contemporary hip hop drum sounds have become so popular, and you can basically get out there and find kits from a lot of, the top producers in the genre, their own kits of their sounds that they're using or they created, and just sample them so easily that, certain people choose to synthesize those and make their own sounds. But I think what you see most commonly, and I find myself doing, is getting onto places like Splice or even on Reddit and online, and you have so much access to such well produced and well mixed drums out there that it's kind of hard not to use those and go from the ground up, designing your own. But people definitely do that as well, and I think people who are looking for unique sounds, will maybe choose synthesizing their drums. But I would say the most common thing you probably see is people sampling drums, from a couple different sources. Maybe not as frequently people are turning to stuff like records, like the early days of hip hop, but it definitely varies from producer to producer.
I find that sampling is the heart of hip hop somehow.
Yeah.
Even if you're sampling synthesized drums, it just is such a, I don't know. There's something about the process of sampling that just vibes so well with what you're trying to do in making hip hop beats. So and maybe it's just a personal thing. I think, and to add to that, I think a sampler to me is the most powerful tool you could have in all of hardware.
I agree.
If you gave me a choice, you go on a deserted island, here's a sampling drum machine, or pick a synthesizer or a drum machine that's not a sampling drum machine, I would take the sampling drum machine, or even just a sampler any day, like a Digitakt or an MPC or even a standalone sampler. It's just so much you could do with it. You can do all the traditional things that you can do with a synthesizer, which means you can put filters on it, add LFOs to it, do modulations to it. You just and you can pump any type of sound in there that you want, which is not possible with kind of a already sealed synthesizer that has an oscillator and that's it. You got this oscillator, or maybe these oscillators, and or even a wavetable synthesizer. Those are going to expand your choices, but it's not going to be the same as a sampler, which anything goes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is one of the main things that appeals me to samplers, is that you don't get them with any sort of kind of source material. There's the preset drums and preset patterns and that kind of thing, but versus a synth where you get something that kind of has its own sound, and then it's on you to mold that sound into what you desire. The sampler is like a clean slate. It's like a blank canvas where it's saying here's all these it has the capability to record audio and edit it in more ways than you could ever imagine. Maybe not quite as much as Ableton, but it really is just such an open book that you take some source material and then you can edit it, and you can take necessarily something that you didn't write and turn it into something so unique and original. That process is something that's always appealed to me so much along the journey of producing music. But yeah, no, it's cool, and there's so many different ways. Like, I was just thinking when you said hip hop is really built upon sampling, it made me think like even sampling your own work, which is something I find myself doing. Recording something in Ableton or on synth and sampling it into a device like this, and then modifying and affecting that sample so much that you're even creating your own work into something completely new. It's like, for these kind of genres, I think it just really adds a lot to the music, and just kind of the listenability and excitement of the tracks.
Yep.
Cool. So definitely keep any questions coming. Trying to think of what we could kind of dive into next. We could continue working on the track a little bit. So we basically just have a really simple sequence going with this short loop, some drum sequence. I have a few other samples in here that we haven't quite used. We could kind of just layer these in. Simple patterns here. I cut the loop in half, so that we could kind of just keep it simple and focus on, you know, getting to some of these.
Maybe you could switch over to showing the drum machine.
Oh yeah, good call. Hopefully you guys could hear that. But we're gonna jump into here. See how this is sounding and looking. Cool, so something that I think this could use is, first of all, what I'm going to do on the, actually going to switch it so that there's going to be a high pass on our sample, just so that we can maybe add something in the low end, like a bass, and figure that out. Also, let me know how the levels are coming through. On the,
levels sound good. I'm monitoring the feed here, and it sounds pretty good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the mix is still a little bit rough, but what I'm going to do is find one of our open slots that I'm not using here, and I'm actually going to try to load in a bass, and we can get into so bass sample, but you know, we're going to play it in a way, you know, kind of chromatically, which is a cool function, and kind of play it as an instrument. So to do that, I'm going to go here, just have my clap sample selected, which is the one we're going to replace, and I'm going to go into the sample browser. So it's first going to bring us to a list of all our samples, and I'm going to go into filtering it down to just our bass sounds. The browser takes some getting used to. I would explain that here, you know, if I had the time, but it's probably not worth much to anybody who doesn't actually own the unit. And basically just filtered out so we can see what kind of basses we have going on. And let's see if I can. Yeah, so if I hit function and then yes, it's going to preview these bass sounds. So I'm going to try to find something that sounds alright. This one's kind of crazy, but could be cool. So now what I did, I should explain that. So loaded this in so that we have this kind of interesting bass note here on our track, and then if I hit function and then track, we're actually going to get into you know, the chromatic mode. So what this has done is turn these kind of buttons down here, which are multifunction, into a keyboard like a piano. So we have our C, and then it goes up, got our flats and sharps here, and so what I'm hearing is this is kind of a root note. So in this example, we can actually record in live. So in the past, when I was creating this track, what do we have of it so far? I was just sequencing things in using that, you know, powerful Elektron sequencer people love. But another function that the Digitakt has, which not all samplers do, but I think most these days would, is to, you know, record in live in real time. And so to do that, we're going to hold on record and then hit play. And now we're armed for recording. And you can just record as you go. So I'm just going to record a little bass. And maybe we can add another note. So we have like a really simple pattern since we're just you know, kind of working with 2 bars here, which I like the sound of it. One thing I want to try to do is maybe affect it a bit. It looks like this sample, the way it was kind of loaded up, has some overdrive already, but I am going to add a bit more, see if we can get a little bit of a dirtier. So before I get too ahead of myself here, what I just did also was doubled up the loop again so that we could get, you know, a little bit longer of a bass line going on. And what I want to do with that is show you a little bit more about the functions of the sequencer. So here we have our first bar, we have that bass note hitting at the beginning, and then here we have our second note. And say I want to copy this note, for example, which is, you know, already has pitch of this is our second lower note. I'm going to hold on the note, hit function, and copy. We're going to copy this, and I'm going to put another one here at the end. But let's say that I don't want this one to trigger every single time the sequence plays. Say I want to trigger it only half the time, or a certain percentage of the time. What I actually can do is go over into this trig conditions menu. So we're going to have to go into the trig page and then hold down the note. And there's actually percentages we can set this to trigger at. So for the example, I'm going to use 50%. So this means at the end of the loop, 50% of the time, we're going to get this extra note. So let's see if it happens the first time through. So I don't think we got it that time. Actually not triggering there. Add another note here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a couple extra bass notes in there so we can go back in there and kind of mess around with some more of those trig conditions.
That's some machine gun typing you got going on there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because once you get into it, it gets pretty quick, but you definitely got to know your way around a bit. And even if you're not using it regularly, it's easy to kind of forget some of the functions. But we're kind of at the point where we have, you know, somewhat of a groove formulated for a song, or the basis of one at least. And so, like when I do my performance videos, for example, a lot of the time what I'm doing is just kind of just live sequencing it by going in here and muting out some of the parts. So let's say we were going to start our song like off with just had these hi-hats or something. Maybe not even, maybe just this open one. And then as time goes on, you know, you kind of just add in the other elements until you're ready to kind of get everything going back in here. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I didn't do the best job of explaining exactly what was going on here during this all, but looks like our focus might have been a little out there too, unfortunately. Thought I was on manual focus. Perhaps not. Alright, hopefully we should be back here. But I don't know, is there anything else that you think maybe I'm leaving out, Abe, that would be worth discussing about this?
Well, as far as the Digitakt we talk about in a second, I just wanted to say some things that we usually say more of. Things like, if you like what you're seeing, you should be hitting the subscribe button, and at least maybe a like or two. I see that you've gotten already 6 likes for what you're doing, according to my screen here. That's pretty good.
Nice.
Pretty good.
Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, you guys, you know, making Thomas feel welcome here. Yeah, so I mean, I'm really feeling this beat that you got going on. So once you got the beat going on, what about sequencing it and so on?
Yeah, so I was just talking about that a little bit. So it's interesting. I actually, you know, the workflow I use with this is really, you know, loop based. And in terms of sequencing, what I end up doing a lot of times is hooking up a recorder, or, you know, going to the interface like I am now and actually kind of doing a live sequence with, you know, playing the parts out. Another way to do it would be to actually, you know, make several patterns. So we could copy this pattern, right? So we're going to hold pattern, get this one going on, function copy, and then we're going to add it to the second slot here, function paste. And what it did is pasted the pattern. So now if we go to our first pattern and our second pattern, we're going to get the same thing. But so if we go into our first pattern, for example, and take out some of these, like let's take out these kicks, and certain items that we don't really need going on, that snare can come out in that first pattern. Let me take the bass out too. We can kind of set ourselves up so that this first pattern is going to kind of be setting us up without having any kick, snare, not too much going on. And then when we're ready, just hit on this pattern, and you kind of do it like you were playing a live clip. You get ahead of the game a little bit before the next pattern starts, and then it will come in with everything. So that would be one way to do it, and it would be really helpful in a performance scenario as well to have these different patterns to switch between. Like I said, my more traditional workflow usually actually is just kind of muting on muting, but it's really up to you on how you want to play it. You could have different patterns that are sounding completely different, almost like you had different songs in each pattern.
Somebody in the chat asked if there's a Thomas performance channel where we could watch you, I guess, play
yeah,
your beats and
yeah, there is a Thomas performance channel. It's called TS Projects. I could put the name maybe in the chat here. But yeah, it'd be cool if you went to check that out. I basically have a bunch of content that is on the Digitakt and different pieces of hardware where you kind of hear some of my recordings be sequenced live, kind of in the process we were just talking about, or in a couple different ways. Sometimes you find me playing some synths and stuff live. But yeah, it's very nice. I appreciate that question. I hope that he's kind of enjoying a bit learning about it. But I think what's interesting to kind of touch upon is like, now we finally have, I'm just going to turn the bass down a little bit in the mix, but a sequence that's kind of worth, this is something I'd probably get to the point where I'd say, hey, this is kind of worth maybe making a track out of, or maybe shop it around to some artists and stuff. Obviously I'd have to sequence it out, but it's it started off not really where I was loving it, and then now it's at a point where I feel like I could really kind of go back in there and fine tune things. And so what I wanted to talk about is some of the ways that you can go about actually doing so. So what I might do is record it like I was saying, just get a line out recording of everything in here, and sequencing things out, muting on muting, making different patterns, and kind of getting a solid arrangement down that way. But a really cool function about the Elektron devices, and this doesn't apply to every single device, but it does apply to most of them. So it excludes the Octatrack, either of the Octatracks, the old one or the new one. It doesn't have this function, but for this box, the Digitakt as well as the Digitone, and I believe some of their other units, there's this software they have called Overbridge, and it's something I definitely want to just touch upon briefly. But what Overbridge is it's a really powerful way to basically sync up this with Ableton or whatever kind of software you're using. And the main draw of Overbridge is that over one single USB cable, you can get all of your tracks, individually routed into your DAW for, mixing, for example. So in this case, like something that would take, I think, just even the simple track a long, long way would be getting some real kind of mixing work done on it in there. And the way it's currently set up and individually, there's some effects on here. There actually is a compressor, and you can sidechain even, which gets pretty crazy to think about from this little box. But in terms of actually getting a real solid mix and getting solid sounding effects and stuff, you're probably going to want to look at your computer or something outside the box. So that's just something I wanted to bring up. It is a big selling point for certain people, the ability to integrate a piece of hardware like this so heavily into your DAW, which it's possible with other pieces of hardware, but I don't think anybody does it quite to the extent that they do it with Overbridge.
So I guess you could make some beats with that, and then once you're like really happy with the beat, you could just kind of like send them in, all the parts individually, into like something like Ableton, and then continue from there, maybe making the production, maybe recording the vocals and whatever you might want to do after that. Is that
correct?
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, so that's kind of the way I look at it too. It's like a good thing to touch on, is like my workflow with it is very much let's get an idea going, let's get this started off the ground, and then let's bring it into, Ableton or whatever it is, and really touch it up and make it into a full track. Not to say that I haven't made, material on here that I think is almost, release ready, or at least worthy enough to put it out on a video on YouTube. But I think the real idea behind these is either, kind of a sketch pad, or even in a performance scenario, it can be really popular. We talked about, DJing with a unit similar to this previously on the show, and I think in that, use case, it would work really well. Even the ability to sequence a couple synths, maybe you have a bass
Yeah, I
line.
was going to bring that up again. You can do that, yeah.
The I/O is, phenomenon here. So you basically have 2 ins for sampling, 2 outs, and those are all 1/4 inch. You got a MIDI in, a MIDI out, MIDI sync, which is something you don't see all 3 of those on, a lot of modern hardware today. Headphone out, and then you can really customize like a lot of those ports to have, multiple functions, and then you got the USB for, mainly for Overbridge or maybe sampling something in. But it's powerful, man. It really is,
Yeah, so if you had to name, I'm going to put you on the spot, but if you had to name like your top 3 favorite things that this thing does, what would they be?
That is a good question. I mean, that it does, it's kind of hard to say like that it does as features, but in general, things I like about the device itself. To start things off, I'd say just the build quality and just like that kind of appealed, the aesthetic, is visually.
So is it like a metal case or a plastic case?
Definitely metal case, really robust. It's got some good weight to it, especially for the size. The screen's really nice, OLED screen. It's very clear, good for dark lit environments. Same with the buttons, the lights, all of those are really, high end and good looking. So that would be the first thing probably, which, for some people they could care less, I guess. They're all about the sound. For me, I think aesthetics kind of always plays into it, especially for production, because it kind of sets you into that mood.
Also, if it's going to stand the test of time, if you want to still work with it in 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Which the way that these are built, I feel like they are built to last a long time. The second thing would be, probably the sequencer and just kind of the workflow behind that. It's very, maybe a little intimidating at first and, complex, but once you start to wrap your head around that, and those trait conditions, which we kind of got into a little bit, like being able to set something to happen only 33% of the time, or even 5% of the time, you could say, I want this to trigger. That's where it can get really generative and really exciting. So that's kind of what I think.
So does it mean that if you like really get into this operating system, would you be able to go walk up to something like maybe an Octatrack or an analog rhythm, which are other Elektron devices, and be kind of take to it like a fish in water or something?
You get pretty good with it. So I've recently gotten Octatrack, for example, and it's kind of taking over the place that this has in my workflow because it's very redundant. It has a lot of the same functionality, but the workflow, the sequencer, I wrap my head around right away because it's pretty much the same. Some of the other workflow aspects of it, like exactly how to sample and that, are a bit different. But yeah, I would say, I was able to get up and running, making stuff with the Octatrack after a couple weeks of owning it, and that I was pretty happy with. And that is heavily to the fact I've been working on this, as well as the Digitone, which has a similar workflow to this in a way.
So it's kind of like, reminiscent of it, or at least, it kind of works in the same hierarchy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think once you're into one of their devices, at least kind of this tier too. I know they have a little bit cheaper models, like the model samples, which I've heard great things about, and same with the cycles is the newer one. But I think, yeah, there's a lot that can be kind of cross-compatible for sure.
Cycles? What is this?
There's some newer devices they put out, over the last couple of years called, the first one was the model samples, which is basically a budget-friendly version of this.
Okay.
It has 6 tracks, which can be switched to MIDI sequence. So versus having 8 tracks.
Does it look the same?
It has a little bit of a different look. The build quality is definitely plastic, and it's it doesn't have a very big screen, pretty tiny screen, but it's it's something worth checking out. Basically the cheapest way to get into the Elektron sequencer, and they also made a companion to that, so it has the same kind of body style, but it's called the Model Cycles, which is a FM synth kind of bass groove box.
Okay.
So it's almost very similar to the Digitakt Digitone kind of combo idea, but a little bit dumbed down versions, cheaper, a little bit. I don't know.
And
I
when
would
you say
imagine
cheaper,
easier to
what do all
use.
these devices go for? What are they listed for?
It's a good question. They definitely hurt the wallet a little bit, but I was thinking of it in terms of like today. Like I wanted to showcase a workflow. Say you were a complete beginner or somebody who is thinking about getting into music production, and don't have a computer, for example. You have your phone. You're rocking with that, and you want a device that's going to be powerful to start making really cool sounding tracks. In theory, this one's going to run you about $750 retail for a new one. You could, get a used one, $600, maybe a little cheaper. And if you were to get this and just have some sort of source material, maybe to your phone, your iPad, or whatever it is, you can really get going with some pretty complex sounding music and some really creative ideas, especially if you're just a beat maker, for example, and you're just looking to make instrumental music. And that could be an argument towards, hey, maybe I don't need to go get, a whole laptop and a whole DAW and kind of go that route. Maybe this is a possible option. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as your first, piece of hardware just due to the, kind of complex nature of the device. But if you're into it and you're sold on it and you're good with computers and kind of figuring out things, I wouldn't, stray you away from it. And
Right.
Robot Harmer just wrote in the chat, so $299 for the cycles, and I guess that'd probably be the same for model samples, which are kind of those lower tiers. So it's about half the price for those. But then you get into the Octatrack, which is a crazy device, and it's pretty much retailing for closer to double the price of this unit. So and it's justified to a certain extent with how crazy a device like that can even get, and how much of a basically straight DAW replacement it becomes.
Does the analog rhythm do sampling, or is that just an analog?
Yeah, the analog rhythm is a really cool. I guess it's kind of turning into an Elektron, a little bit
Well,
of
yeah.
Elektron fanboy stream, but the analog rhythm is a really cool device, and what it actually allows you to do is it has built-in analog drum machine, right? So true analog, I believe, and then it allows you to layer those drums with samples. So like on each pad, you could have your kick drum of the analog, whatever the kind of preset drum machine is, and then you can layer that with another kick or some other sample, and that's kind of the workflow there. And that's super appealing, and we actually have one of those laying around the school, but I've never gotten too deep into the workflow with it, but it definitely sounds like a pretty appealing, kind of little device. Yeah.
Right. Well, we're almost out of time. Let's not forget to mention what we are here, what we're doing here. This is
Definitely.
You're watching 343 TV. Today is Thomas on in the driver's seat. This is the Hardware Basics show. We are here every day of the week at 1 p.m. Except that next week we're going to take a little bit of a break. Next week we have basically ending this first season. We're going to call it the first season, and we're going to pick up on season 2. We're going to make some adjustments, make some improvements, move a couple of things around. This show is actually going to stay on Fridays at 1 p.m. But we're going to expand the topics, not just to hardware, but to all sorts of things. We're just going to call it basics from this point, and basics based on anything, basics this edition, it could be a hardware edition, or it could be a mixing edition, or a production edition, whatever. We really need you guys to send in your questions, because we love your questions. We want to be able to start and have a segment in the show where we just dedicate to your questions. As I said, we are 343 TV. We come from 343 Labs, which 343 Labs is a school which we started here in New York. We now have a school that's a physical school that just opened in Berlin. We have classes up and running there. Everything is moving great over there because they have a little more freedom than we do in here in New York. But we have, of course, our online classes, which we have a whole slew of classes that you could choose from Ableton to Logic to mixing and mastering, vocal production. Am I missing anything, Thomas? Synthesis.
Yep, sound design.
Design.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it. I did also want to mention we are having an open house this weekend for those upcoming classes in the fall. So it's going to be held virtually. So if you're interested in taking class with us soon, I wouldn't miss that. It's going to be an opportunity for you to kind of get a little bit of a demo with the instructors and get an idea for what learning with us would be like. So to RSVP for that, you just got to go to 343labs.com/events and you'll see all the info there. But good opportunity to kind of check things out and meet some of the staff here at the school.
And Robert Dharma says, time for the cliffhanger. So give him the cliffhanger, Thomas.
What do you think that you'd say for cliffhanger
season
specifically?
Season 1 cliffhanger.
Yeah, I would say I'm gonna leave you with tomorrow. We got a feedback session with Clara Lim, so I would say definitely check that out. So it's not quite the end of the series yet for the season really 1 of the show, but we do have a lot of really exciting stuff coming for season 2. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll give a little hint to some stuff that might be coming. One of the new additions to this second season is going to be bringing back some giveaways for you guys. So I think that's a pretty enticing reason to kind of come back and bring some friends into the mix to for the new shows. But there's going to be great new shows. Abe will be back on. Some of the familiar faces, some new teachers will be on. Some really exciting new shows. So we're just going to keep it rolling. We love the community we're building here, and you guys coming back every day to watch has been super nice to see you guys support us. So we'll keep the content up if you guys keep showing up. Awesome. I think we'll leave them with that, Abe, right?
All right, yeah, it's your show, so you can sign off, I guess.
All right, yeah, thanks everybody for coming to check out the show today. I appreciate all the support. I hope you're able to at least get something out of this, whether you're sold on the Digitakt or not. I hope maybe there was something you picked up on to apply to your own music making. Thanks for all the questions, and we'll see you. Somebody's talking about the giveaways already. Yes, there'll be more plugins for season 2, so look out for that. Maybe some hardware. Who knows? We're trying to get some really cool stuff for you guys. More details will come on our social media platforms at 343 Labs. So be sure to check out all that info there, and we will see you tomorrow for feedback session.